Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast, a place where real progress shines beyond appearances and distractions. Here, voices from across industries come together to share wisdom, stories, and strategies that remind us what's possible when purpose leads the way. Because true progress is not measured by how it looks, but by the impact it leaves behind. Let's get started.
Welcome to Impact Over Optics, the podcast where we go beyond appearances and focus on what really moves the needle: authentic leadership, purposeful results, and lasting impact. I'm your host, Jon Detweiler. Today, I am very excited to be joined by Brant Whisler. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
Officer Whisler of Upper Gwynedd Township Police Department brings a great mix of leadership, experience, humor, and authenticity to this episode on humor as a leadership tool. A graduate of Upper Moreland High School, Brant earned his bachelor's degree in chemistry from Washington College before beginning a career centered around service, teamwork, and community connection. Before joining the Upper Gwynedd Township Police Department in 2005, Brant served in the United States Coast Guard and worked as a specimen processing specialist at National Medical Services. Over the years, he's taken on an impressive range of roles within law enforcement, currently serving as the department's crime prevention officer, while also working as a field training officer, firearms instructor, armorer, DARE officer, pet detective, and counter sniper team leader within the Montgomery County SWAT Team Central Region. Outside the badge, Brant has a real passion for travel, adventure, and exploring new places. He enjoys hiking, spending time outdoors, and finding opportunities to connect with nature whenever he can. He's also well known for his love of turtles, which somehow fits perfectly with his laid-back personality, curiosity, and sense of humor. So before we get too far into this, I gotta ask two things. What the heck is a pet detective?
So it's an unofficial title that I was bestowed upon when I started what's called a pet registry. Loose dogs frequently get sent to a holding facility, fines are attached to it. So when I spoke to my chief about the idea of starting an internal file of contact information and description information for the local dogs in the community, I then reached out, and as we encountered them, we would hand out these forms, people would submit them, and I established a catalog so that when we find a loose dog, we can look it up by description, the area it was found, and then return it to the owner without having to assess any fines or any unnecessary delay. So when that was completed and successful, he had a badge made for me, and I was assigned the title of pet detective, mostly because I don't do humans.
Dude, that is an epic story. I do not think I know of all my contacts. I don't have any pet detectives as friends. So I do appreciate you are the only one. I also got to say, you've become a bit of a celebrity locally, as far as you've had two instances that have made the news. I've watched the reels on this. I'm super fascinated, and I have to ask, what's up with you and deer rescue? So,
it's spring and love is in the air. So as the result, there are the offspring that come as a result. And frequently, we encourage people to let the baby fawns especially be, because the mom will leave to feed and come back. And sometimes we think they're abandoned, but truly they're just being left while mom regains her strength to return. But sometimes they wander off, get scared, and end up in precarious positions. So last week, I ended up having to reach down through the grate in a roadway to lasso one and pull it up. But the call came into us as a deer in a sewer drain. So immediately, our first thought was Teenage Mutant Ninja Deer. And that was super awesome. Given my affinity for turtles, I was excited to see the adaptation for, decades later. But when we got there, we were able to rescue it and get it back and reunite with mom. So a few days later, we received another call of a deer in a drainage ditch. This one was a little older, and I was able to remove the grate itself. And despite it jumping around in mud and splashing me and getting me all dirty, we got it out there. But it's something that occurs frequently, and I am always willing to jump on the animal calls just because I very much enjoy the interaction with them.
So I heard a rumor that this deer may have been named by you.
Yes. So what's really important whenever you're dealing with something, especially in police work, is the image. And while we're out there doing good, helping the wildlife, engaging with the community, because community members are nice enough to call us about this stuff, you have to still sort of keep it light. And in this particular circumstance, when we saved the deer and given my initial belief that it may have been mutated by ooze that got into the sewer system. I decided to name it Leonardo after a female deer, and it put that little ray of sunshine in my pocket. So I, advertised it as that to try and gain traction, which it interestingly did.
I absolutely love that. And that's actually a really good segue. But before we get too deep into this, let's talk about a moment at work when humor changed the energy. And how about an example of a time that you leveraged that to just change the whole air about what you were engaged in?
Absolutely. My first example coming to mind, the police department is a union, and we do negotiate our contract. And as a result, a lot of times with such things, they become pretty contentious. And there's a pretty long history of them versus us that we engage in. And especially with some of my predecessors, it was just the way it was done. When it became my opportunity to become part of the bargaining unit, I decided, let's change it up. Let's throw that curveball. So we went there with a PowerPoint presentation. In it, we had pictures of our officers with their families. In it, we had what we're willing to give to get the things we asked for. We had what it's going to cost the township. We had done our research. We showed up prepared. And we had a more engaging interaction where it wasn't about, we want this, give us that. It was, hey, we'd like to earn this. We would like the opportunity to make this work for both of us. We're a team. Let's work together. But the creme de la creme, the icing on the cake was at the end when I said, hold on one moment. And we finished our presentation. I walk over to the refrigerator that's in this secure boardroom and open the door and pull out 2 bottles of sparkling cider because it is an official workplace. And I said, can we pop these now and celebrate? And the look on the negotiating board's face was just sheer and utter, somewhere between pleasure and being baffled by the idea of what just happened, because it was so outside the realm of what typically occurs. It was received well. It was advertised to other places. And we were actually asked to recommend that approach so that in the future, there could be more of a group effort as opposed to an animosity between the two groups.
I love that. So is it fair to say that you leveraged sort of that moment to improve connection? Is that a good way to phrase that?
Absolutely. I mean, the relationship that has grown from there, just from the idea that we realize that it's a give and take, the idea that we're willing to admit that, hey, we're asking for things, but we're willing to give things. We're willing to show, hey, we're people too. And we recognize their authority. We recognize and respect their position and the things that they're accountable for. And then they respect what we're asking for. So it's huge in that the levity just allows that relationship to grow and be open.
I love it. So let's transition back to when you first really recognized that humor was part of what you do and how you use it. When did you first realize that humor wasn't just a personality? It was actually affecting people. When do you think that was?
It's through a series of experiences, and I hate to say from middle school, high school, college, and then professionally, but it's more about learning to fail and then being able to apply that to how to succeed and to the audience you're trying to reach. It's not just about what I feel, it's about how I show what I feel and welcome others into experiencing it with me, while also realizing their position and trying to let them experience it. So the humor is almost about being able to laugh at yourself, welcoming others to laugh at you, but that also opens them up to the idea that they can laugh at themselves. And if you're laughing at them, it isn't offensive. It isn't you're picking on them. It's that you're becoming part of their story.
So was it, I don't know, I think when we think about humor, we think about trying to be funny, right? Like I'm going to tell a joke that's going to be funny, or I'm going to try to find a way to interact with somebody in a way that is funny. It's not about being funny, was it? It was more about being human, being real.
Absolutely. If you try and tell a joke, you're doomed to fail. At least in my experience. I shouldn't speak for everybody, but when I show up, I don't try and make people laugh. I start by being honest. And if you're honest in a way that isn't offensive, isn't aggressive, then you open that door for both directions. And I really, truly feel that the gateway to good communication is honesty. So if I do something that is just messed up and I say, you know what, I just messed up. That was a terrible approach. Can I redo that? And sometimes, especially as a police officer, when you say that, you go, Yeah, the way I said that was not right. That's not the words I meant to do. Can I start over? The people look at you and go, wow, you just showed me that you're human. You showed me that you're more than a uniform and a badge. And those people open up to you a little bit more. They realize, okay, maybe you're here to help me. Maybe you're not here to make my day worse. You're not here to enforce the law. You're not here to, because I committed a crime. You're here because our initial goal is helping and peace.
I absolutely appreciate you saying that, because the other thing that I think we as a society struggle with today is that humanizing the person behind the badge. We're very quick to look at law enforcement and be like, well, they're the police. No, you're a human being. You put on a uniform and you do a very difficult job. So I love how you use humor to sort of connect the person to the job. I think that that's just phenomenal. What do you see in people when humor works well? Like, what do you get out of it? You had mentioned with the board when you guys were able to pull that off, it was a sort of halfway between, humor, laughter, and they were baffled. What do you see in people when humor is working? What do you see?
There is, and I'm going to speak to this professionally. There's an automatic tension when police show up. You show up, you see the uniform, you see the car, you see the badge, you see the lights, you see the handcuffs hanging from our belt. And there's that automatic tension of, why are they here? Did I do something wrong? Am I going to get in trouble? Is this going to cost me money? Did I get caught? Whatever the case may be. So really that first interaction, that first couple seconds, that first encounter, it's more than just the words. It's more than just the uniform and the appearance. They know who I am. I show up. Now, I always repeat myself. I always say who I am, but I want them to then also realize that behind all of that, there is a person whose goal and job it is to help. We want to be there to make things better. We want to help solve the problem. People call us on their worst day frequently. So a lot of times that tension is what needs to be broken. I have a memorable situation that involved this. It was early December, Christmas time, and there was someone driving around stealing the holiday cards off of the top of trash cans and recycling cans. My partner and I went out and we spoke to the caller. They showed us the video. We were not able to get identifiable information beyond the make, model, and color of the vehicle. So he asked me, what do we do? Do we call the other local departments and tell everybody to be on the lookout for this relatively common colored, common make, model car? I said, we had a description of the actor as well, but nothing enough to identify anyone. I said, hold on. And we drove around the neighborhood and we found another trash company vehicle. And I said, hey guys. And we walked up, 2 police officers in uniform walking up to 3 guys working their job, picking up the garbage. And immediately chests puff out, shoulders go back, and there's that tension. Guys, keep your hands out. That's the first thing police always tell you. Let me see your hands. Show me your hands. And these guys, they look even more tense. And I go, now, I don't want you reaching into your pockets and grabbing your dollar bills. I am not a dancer. These 3 guys look at me and like, time out, what? And, just the inquisitive looks on their face, like, man, what just happened? And it was wonderful, because that was enough to break that ice and get them to stop for a minute and see beyond the uniform. And I explained to them, I said, hey guys, listen, there's somebody going around. They're removing your Christmas cards. And all of a sudden I then got angry looks. I said, it's not us. It has nothing to do with us, but we want to find these guys. I said, do you have a radio? They said, yes. I said, can you contact other trash trucks around, other recycling trucks, your other companies, your other trucks? They said, yeah, we can talk to them. I said, here's what I'm telling you. We're looking for this type of vehicle, this color. If you see anything, give us a call if you want. And they looked at me and they go, thank you. We'll take care of it. You guys have a great day. Let us know what we can do. And immediately that interaction was now a positive one. And whereas initially they thought, hey, these guys are going to come give us a hard time, they left saying these guys are trying to help us. And that is really the goal. But that tension is the crux of what police have to overcome every encounter we have.
So I feel like, if I can play this back a little bit, you use that as a tool to almost build trust, right? To build that connection. So does humor create trust, or does trust make humor possible? Chicken before the egg? Like, which is it? Is it humor allows for trust to happen, or trust is needed to be able to appreciate humor?
It's a two-way street.
Okay.
And it kind of depends on the circumstance, because the best way, I'm going to use a story to explain this. But when I was a newer officer, when we would make traffic stops, a lot of times, you pull somebody over again. They assume they did something wrong, but it might be you have a taillight out. It might be that there's something hanging from your car. There's not always necessarily you did something wrong, but there's a safety factor involved as well. And this one time, this was in fact for a violation. Somebody, decided to proceed through, we'll generously say, an orange light. And I pulled them over. When I walked up, they put their windows down and, did everything I could ask for. But there was a young child in the back that was crying and very upset. The sirens and the lights, and they thought mommy or daddy was going to jail. And I go up and I get the information and I handle the traffic stop. But I gave them a warning. And when I walked back up, I went to the back window and the parent goes, "Everything okay?" I said, "Hold on, I need to address this." And I looked at the child who was, I'm going to say about maybe 6, 7 years old. I said, "Your mommy did something wrong. I'd really like to give them, say it's okay and give them a warning. Is that all right?" "Okay." I said, "But in order to do that, you need to sign this piece of paper with this." And I pulled a foot-long pen out of my pocket, a giant purple pen. And the kid kind of looked at me and the parents started laughing. And the kid said, "Can you sign this?" And then, the kid scribbled across the paper. And it was in no way legible. And then I spoke with the parent. I gave them a copy of the warning. I said, "Listen, try and be more aware of what's going on." I returned to my car and I'm like, okay, I just had a very positive interaction. And then I heard the local radio and my sergeant gets on the radio and goes, "The old giant pen gag, huh?" And I didn't know he was watching. So I was using humor to build trust with the driver, with the community, with the motoring public. My sergeant saw that experience. I explained it to him after the fact. And my use of humor then built trust from my sergeant, where he looked at it and said, "Okay, I thought you were being weird," which I was, to be fair. But he looked at it and said, "I see why the application was there. I've never seen that before, but I will respect your ability to make that decision and handle it." So in that case, both were occurring at the same time, but from different entities.
So that's clearly an opportunity or a good example of where humor hit well, right? Like you made that connection. Can you tell me about a time that humor didn't land or landed badly?
Plenty.
Oh, no.
Ooh, maybe this podcast. No. So one particular instance, I had a person who typically when we are interacting with someone and we have reason to believe there's a concern, we ask for their permission to either search their person, search their vehicle, and just make sure that everything's safe, to make sure that person's not engaging in anything that's dangerous to them, dangerous to us, so forth and so on. In this instance, we had a person that we were concerned might try and harm themselves, and we wanted to make sure they didn't have anything readily available based on the information we had to do so. So I said to this person, "Hey, is it okay? Could I possibly search your vehicle for anything that would be cause for concern to the police?" And the person said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And I said, "Well, anything that would be you could use to hurt me, hurt yourself. It's all about safety here. I'm not trying to get you in trouble." I said, "All right, well, like what?" And I said, "Oh, and I had a standard speech." You get into the repetition, and instead of being personable, I went into sort of the robot mode and said, "Oh, well, my standard speech, guns, drugs, babies, bombs, dead bodies, severed fingers, rabid squirrels." I came up with various different things. And at the time, it was a standard response I had. This person fixated on one of those things, and it was the babies. Why would I have babies in my car? And I felt that energy just switch. Whereas things were going well, all of a sudden, my attempt at levity turned into a problem. And the person became very animated with me. I looked over to another officer and I said, "Hey, I need to go. Can you handle this?" And I realized in that moment that didn't work. The relationship I was building suddenly hit that stopping point. I did something wrong and I needed to realize I am no longer the person in charge here. I need someone else to help me. I need someone else to take over and make sure that this goes well. So I turned it over to another officer. The other officer came in, said some things about how I was new and I didn't know what I was doing. And I understood that because that's what needed to be done right then, and made a few jokes at my expense. So they used humor to de-escalate, to mitigate the situation. And that person cooperated. We were able to give them the help they needed, and everything turned out well. So my attempt at humor didn't go well, but then my failure became the catalyst for success.
That's incredible. And I think sometimes people get wound up. There's a concept called sunk cost bias, where you feel like if you spend too much money into some project, you can't stop and start over. I think sometimes when we get into a line of questioning, a line of discussion, maybe even a humor line, we feel like we have to finish it. I really appreciate how you described the way that you recognized at this point, like this was not giving you the outcome that you wanted, and you were able to pivot. Is that hard? How could you encourage people to be able to have that courage? And I think that that's probably the easiest word to use, but what gives you the courage to be able to say, you know what, I got to step away from this?
Well, I mean, mostly it's the ability to recognize your failure and not have to maintain control. As a police officer, we are expected to show up, have the answers, fix the problem, and move on quickly, because that's what people see. That's what they expect. That's what happens sometimes. But it creates a false sense of expectation in us. And sometimes the greatest tool we have is the ability to say, I don't know. I need help as well. Stepping away from that control and being able to ask for guidance, assistance. To be honest, sometimes the person who is asking you for help is the one who can give you the information you need to help them solve that problem. But instead of saying, I am here, I have the answers, do it this way, you need to be able to realize, you know what, I'm stumped on this one and I can't do this myself. And that vulnerability a lot of times, and that willingness to smile and laugh at yourself and go, I have no idea, is really what opens someone up to the idea, again, seeing beyond the uniform and looking at you as a person and going, all right, you know what, he may not have the answer, like, but I can find it out. If you and I can work together, we can make this happen. If we can't make it happen, I will call another person to come here who can help. And it's knowing your skill sets, knowing your limitations, and knowing if it's your day to shine, or sometimes it's your day to realize that you need to bring someone else forward.
That's incredible. So we've talked a little bit about the high stakes that are involved in your profession, right? Like, again, the currency that you deal with is much different than the rest of the world. Everything, for the most part, that you deal with surrounds things like conflict and pressure and crisis. I loved the story about the trash company. Do you have another time, another example of maybe in your personal life where you used humor to diffuse an incredibly tense and or difficult situation? No, that laugh always makes me nervous.
There was, in fact, a time where I'm going to call it confidence, but some may look at that as overconfidence. I saw a situation. There was a problem that needed to be solved. I used logic, physics, fast talking, car salesmanship, and a few other overzealous approaches to convince a friend that I had a skill set that I truly didn't have. This particular gentleman had a tree that was creating a hazard and may have, in the wrong circumstance, fallen on his house. In the right circumstance, I said, it is going to be cut this way. It is going to fall this way. Don't need ropes. Don't need tree guys. It is going to work. I have full confidence, do this type of stuff all the time. And a lot of the smile, the approach, the willingness to laugh about, like, yeah, I got this. Yeah, it's not a problem, encouraged him enough to trust me to do this particular circumstance. Moving forward, ultimately at the end, the tree landed exactly where I said it would, and everything went relatively okay. The interim was more of a dicey situation where it did start falling towards the house. There were some minor injuries and it did almost squish me when it landed. There was some trust that was lost, some humor that led to the trust that created the situation. And I can say, from my perspective, at least now, a few years later, we can look back at that and the trust has been regained. And now we find humor in that experience. I'm going to ask if you have the same opinion on the matter.
So, in full disclosure, I happen to be the individual in question. It happened to be a tree on my property right near my house.
Where I asked, where I said.
End of the day, it did land exactly where you said it would. But, again, looking back in that moment when that was beginning to fall towards the house, everything changed immediately, right? It became crisis. We problem solved very quickly. And again, just with our work experience and what we do, we came up with a solution in a matter of seconds and were able to remedy it. I remember being so mad when it happened. But again, it was some of the humor that you used once the crisis was resolved that brought my baseline down. I can get wound up at times, but you ended up, we talked through it. There was laughter. We joked about it. And today we can actually laugh about it. But no, it's a good example of where humor became the connector that sort of lowered the overall temperature of the situation. So I appreciate the fact that you didn't crush my house. Thank you for that.
I might also have to put in there that we also had to ask for help. We did call for the two ladies that were here, yours and mine, and they in fact were part of saving the day. And that asking for help is a big part of it, because whereas we realized the plan may not have gone the way I was hoping, but laughing about it now, I remember at the time expressing about how my particular derriere was not able to hold the weight of the tree as it was going the wrong direction. And we asked for that help. And it really did, while humor became immediate concern, worry, it then also dissipated quickly once we all worked together.
Again, it's a really good example of how humor, even in the midst of crisis, can still bring a little bit of resolution to that. So let's transition back to leadership a little bit. What's a misconception that people have about humor and leadership? What's something that you think people they don't get right when they think about humor?
I guess to me, as far as leadership goes and humor, is some people are naturally gravitate towards being leaders. They're reluctant leaders. There are people who feel as though they have to be leaders because they are put in that position and they feel obligated to. And then there are a lot of people in the background who are amazing and could lead, but aren't given the opportunity. And a lot of times that humor and that, again, the levity of keeping things light is what might encourage those people to step up and say, hey, I have this, I can help out. But part of that recognition and part of building that confidence and having that person step forward and being willing to lead is that inherent leader's ability to look and say, my job right now is not to lead, but to lead everyone in following that person. And so there are different levels of leading that, if you can be open to the idea and what the humor and what the keeping things calm and almost jovial allows, is the ability for other people to feel comfortable. If we're all smiling, we're all happy, and people aren't worried, they're calm, they're thinking, they're breathing, and now they can work together. And that's really what allows a person who can lead to move to that position if it's not something that they're naturally comfortable with.
Okay. That is a phenomenal answer. I have just, a couple of things here to sort of wrap up as we wind this down. If you had to go back and talk to your younger self, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself when it comes to humor in leadership, in the workplace, in life? What would that advice be?
Be willing to laugh at yourself, recognize why you're laughing, and that's because you're uncertain or you're learning. But then also take that and apply it to others. And applying it to others doesn't mean laughing at others. It doesn't mean necessarily believing that others are uncertain in their answers, although that may be the case. But sometimes when people laugh at their own stories, when people laugh at their own experiences, when people seem uncertain and have that sort of nervous laugh, instead of trying to figure out why they're laughing, instead of trying to understand where the humor is from your perspective, take a step back and trying to find the humor in the relationship you're having with that person at that moment. Why are they laughing? And if you can try and experience it from their perspective, then the humor comes from the relationship more so than the story itself. And that's huge because that helps build that confidence. And whether that's a coworker, whether it's a family member, whether it's a stranger on the street that I'm encountering, trying to help on that worst day of their life, being able to relate with them and have that experience together is huge. And when that can be done in the calm, relaxing, humorous way, it really just opens the door for a lot of possibilities and successes.
That's incredible. I really appreciate your time today. I have so much respect for the work that you and your brothers and sisters in blue do. You guys do a tough job, and I love seeing how you're able to leverage humor in the space that you work. You really just do a phenomenal job with that. So, Officer Whisler, thank you again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. I really appreciate your take on this topic. My name is Jon Detweiler, and remember, authentic change always outlasts appearance. Until next time, lead with purpose and leave a real mark.
Thanks again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. We hope today's insights sparked fresh ideas and reminded you of the power of purpose-driven work. Please share this episode with others who believe in real change, and join us again as we continue to look beyond appearances and focus on the impact that truly lasts.